Welcome back to part 3 of our coverage of the Dyatlov Pass episode. We still have Anne and Natasha here, and we are going to start to cover the theories of what happened out there.
So I'm going to go through the theories then now, based, kind of like from the least likely to this is complete whack job stuff to the, well, this might have some kernels of truth. All right. So the first one is that they were attacked by the Mansi. So that some people of this local tribe didn't like them being on their land. They clearly were on their land. There's pictures, there's photographs of them looking at way markers on the trees and stuff left by them. And also they point to that there was a ceremonial site found not terribly far away from where this happened that had been used for a sacrifice. But here's the thing. The Mansi, A, didn't sacrifice humans. Usually it was moose that they then consumed. And B, there were no other tracks. Why would they have hidden and covered their tracks? Plus, then it makes no sense that so many of them froze to death if they were being herded downhill to be sacrificed. None of the injuries indicate that at all.
Right.
So that one doesn't add up at all. That one's bonkers.
Short comment. That is one of the main versions that the Soviet KGB was investigating. Mm-hmm. They called numerous Mansis up, to get them interrogated. The techniques of interrogation, based on what I read, were sometimes not 100% ethical. Oh. So they kind of put a lot of pressure on the Mansis, but not a single person, mentioned that they held any grudge against the hikers or ever did anything against the hikers. And so the KGB dismissed that idea, saying that there is absolutely no proof that would support this version.
Well, see, I didn't know that about the interrogation techniques, but that holds, that tracks. That makes no sense. Nothing about that makes any sense. So, of course, then there's the Yeti attack theory based on that one photograph. It seems solely to be based on that one photograph. But again, that makes zero sense. These injuries were not caused by a large creature. There were no other tracks. No, none of that makes any sense at all.
Right.
Obviously not.
I don't even know how when they look at that picture that somebody looks at that and says, yes, it's absolutely a Yeti. Why would a Yeti be black, first of all?
Right, they'd be white if they lived in the snow. So, yeah, it makes no sense. So now the third theory, and this makes me feel...
One first thing, if you talk about the Yeti, it's like what? Like killing for what? To eat, the bodies for cannibalistic reasons, but the bodies were not eaten.
Right, the injuries don't match.
Yeah, and the food was left in the tent. Right. So, and also with the Mansis, I'm sorry, I didn't say it right away, but there were some money found in the tent because, they had some money on them. Mm-hmm. There was some alcohol, which in those parts is extremely valuable. So there were some valuable things in the tent.
That's true. The medicinal alcohol was still there. You're right.
Yeah, and the cameras were there. So, had it been people would have probably taken the stuff that's valuable, and it was all still there.
And of course, why would people be out in that weather that killed these people so quickly?
Exactly. And if they were there, how did they survive?
Right. It makes no sense. None of that makes sense. But this one makes me feel a little paranoid, but everybody's kind of slightly admitted to pieces of this, is that there might have been some military tests going on at the time, dropping like Soviet parachute mines, which then they explode and can cause these same kind of concussive injuries that we saw in the last 4. It explains some of the lights and stuff like that. Some of the clothing, 3 articles of clothing were found to have higher than normal radioactivity on them. And so maybe some of that explains it. The U.S. has actually admitted that in the early parts of 1959, at that point, they were testing photo flash bombs or something like that in the area. But at the same time, you're not finding debris from these bombs. These bombs would leave debris. And why would planes be flying in that type of wind? That's extremely dangerous.
Well, the funny thing is that that's the version that my mother supports.
Oh, yeah?
Interesting. Yeah. She thinks that, she knows, it's a known fact, that the Ural Mountains were a site for a lot of different tests of different new equipment. This area is mountainous, it's remote, so it's not a bad testing site.
And an excellent testing site.
And you do not necessarily have to fly a plane. You can just shoot some kind of missile.
Really? You can do it from a ground-based and send it?
Well, yeah, and then it explodes up in the air. You know what I mean? So it doesn't have to be a plane, because I don't think any planes could fly in that kind of wind.
They couldn't, yeah.
Yeah.
And then with that wind, they might not know where their stuff was going to land.
Exactly, yeah. And why my mom thinks that this is the most credible theory is because the whole investigation and the materials of the investigation were classified, and they were declassified, I think, around like the year 2000. So some 40 years later.
Wow.
So, if it was, like 9 students going up to the mountain and freezing to death, like, why would you classify that information?
That's true. That's a good point.
That is a good point. However, since they had to essentially register their trip and their path, why would the military not know that there were hikers out in that area?
Well, with that wind, they might not have been able to control where their stuff went.
And they also deviated the route. They've also not gone
That's
exactly.
true. They did deviate a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But no pieces. Well, of course, if it's classified, maybe that's been covered up, because they never indicated there were any pieces of any of this stuff found. Because when these blow up, they're going to leave pieces.
Right.
Yeah, well, possibly it was hidden. Possibly, those pieces would not be found immediately next to the tent, because, the explosion could be, miles away.
Just the concussive force reached them?
Yeah. Yeah,
maybe.
There are some loopholes in this version as well. And one of them is where is the debris? And where's information, but because it was classified, they could just remove some parts of.
That is highly suspicious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this has actually made me like the military theory even more.
Okay.
Which would explain one of the things that I couldn't explain at all, like why the hell did they get out of that tent? So,
that is super weird, yeah.
If they're heading for the trees to get away from bombs, that makes more sense. So, okay. Another theory is just, well, it's not even a theory, it's just that hypothermia is why they were naked, mostly naked, is that it could be that paradoxical undressing. They started getting hypothermia and they thought they were too hot and they're taking it off. Though a lot of the clothing showed rips and tears and cuts, so I still think they were undressed after they died to take the clothing. But that's possible, because as they were freezing to death, people do weird things. But at this point is where a couple of sources, and again, nobody said this came from the autopsies, or I don't know where this information came from, that some of them or a lot of them were intoxicated when this happened. But there was no indication that a lot of alcohol was found or anything like that. How were they intoxicated? What they were intoxicated with? They had started out the trip with the intention to be incredibly healthy. So I don't know if that's just a red herring or where that information comes from.
Right.
Well, from what I read, when some of the sources say intoxicated, they're referring to the fact that the color of the faces and bodies was kind of off.
The liquidity was off. That's true.
And several people that died had kind of this foamy stuff around their mouths. I think, I don't remember which ones. I think it was the Kolmogorova. What was her first name?
Was that Zenaida?
Yeah, she's the lady who was climbing up to the tent.
Zenaida.
Yeah. So she had this foamy substance frozen around her mouth, and I think Rustem Slobodin had that as well.
Also had it. Okay. Which kind of goes back towards the carbon monoxide poisoning idea.
Exactly, yeah. So when, intoxicated, as in there was some kind of poisonous substance that may have affected their judgment. and may have contributed to what happened.
Okay. So maybe this is kind of slightly a mistranslation, just it got simplified to intoxicated when it meant altered in some way.
Possibly, yeah, because they had alcohol with them, and I think the flask with alcohol was found intact, so they haven't been drinking.
It was fine, yeah. They hadn't been drinking it. Interesting. That kind of gives some credibility to the carbon monoxide theory. Another one, of course, we'd already touched on this a little bit, is that Semyon, the latecomer, and possibly Georgie, who had worked previously cleaning up radioactive material, were considered maybe to be KGB agents. And there's this whole elaborate theory that they had some radioactive material with them and some fake secrets, and they were supposed to hand it over to CIA agents, and that the agents figured out it was fake and killed everybody. But again, that doesn't track with the types of injuries and the number of footprints and all of that stuff. The only thing it sort of would touch on is the radioactivity on clothing, and that doesn't make sense, really. But yeah, but then it does kind of touch on why there's shadiness about Semyon's background. There's something going on back there.
There is some weird stuff with him, but I'm still not convinced.
I don't buy KGB agent, no.
I mean, they're in the middle of nowhere.
And surely, yeah, like Anne is saying, surely there's got to be an easier way to exchange information or substances. You don't have to climb some mountain in the middle of nowhere and meet other people.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. There is something weird with him, but I don't think that's it.
I'm not buying it.
So, and of course there's people who say the lights in the sky were aliens. I mean, but here's one that's kind of interesting and a little bit weird, and this is the idea of infrasound, because what the weather that they were experiencing right then is what's called a Kármán vortex, and that produces these catabolic winds, which were these winds of dense air kind of rolling down the mountain really fast, just crashing into things. And it creates what is called infrasound. So if it's whipping around, and it can cause people, kind of like the uncanny valley effect, where if you're around an electrical outlet that's not shielded properly, you feel uneasy. It can make people feel that way. It can make them basically overreact because they're feeling spooked. That these winds could have been creating that sound. But also, those winds blowing like that with that stovepipe being outside, it would make sense if that was forcing, like if you have a chimney and there's high wind, how it'll sometimes force the smoke back down into your house, that maybe these winds were forcing the exhaust.
Something with the air pressure was changing a lot too with this storm to get that wind to come straight down the mountain like that. Mm-hmm. So it could have caused the carbon monoxide. Any carbon-based burning gives off carbon monoxide. Now, wood is not going to be as bad as charcoal or oil or kerosene.
Right, but wood still will put off carbon monoxide if burned in a closed environment.
So those changes in pressures and those winds could have caused that to back up into the tent, which would explain the panic to get out, which is, screw this.
Yeah.
We're cutting this open.
Right, maybe they were just trying to vent it at that point, even get some fresh air. Maybe they weren't even planning to get out at that point. I don't know, because they probably weren't thinking clearly. Now, of course, the big one, and this is the one that's gotten a lot of scientific interest lately, is this idea. There's no evidence of a full avalanche, and this area the slope wasn't right, and it's not known for avalanches, but of a slab avalanche, because again, like we said, the tent was set up incorrectly. Maybe it wasn't so much the tent as that because they cut into the snow, and so that weaker layer of snow below, new snow on top, along with these catabolic winds pushing, could have caused this smaller avalanche to push down on the tent, either blocking that entrance to the stove, the exhaust to the stove, or even causing them to fear, oh, this is going to completely cover the tent, and jump out. So those are a possibility. And honestly, it looks like the ones who, I guess, built the raft, the four, that it sounds to me like they got tumbled in maybe a small slab avalanche of some kind and pushed into that ravine. Their injuries would be pretty indicative of that.
Yeah.
I mean, they got tossed and thrown and crushed. So
actually, the investigative committee. So the investigation committee of the Russian Federation reopened the case in 2018, and I think that's why Simon's body was exhumed.
Gotcha.
Because the relatives, kept pushing, saying we need answers, and there was so much interest. There has been so much interest around this case that they've reopened it. And in 2019, which happens to coincide with the anniversary, they made the announcement that they believe, having studied the evidence, having re-examined the evidence, they believe that it was an avalanche. And so they kind of lean towards the natural. Well, they don't lean. They actually flat out say
said it's a slab avalanche. And that's what I've been seeing in like Nature and these scientific journals. Popular scientific journals. I've been seeing that now they're really supporting the slab avalanche, though it doesn't really explain everything.
It doesn't, but they kind of, in a way, to like in their attempt to address some of the inconsistencies, they've been saying, that the investigation was probably lacking due to lack of experience on the part of the autopsy expert. Due to the fact that there were not enough pictures taken before the search group kind of came to the tent, because they could have explored the tracks better. So they were saying that due to some technological deficiencies in 1959 and the fact that some people may not have been the most professional people, and a lot of that comes to this autopsy expert saying that that was probably his first case, and they were saying it's kind of strange that such an important case, that became known all around the Soviet Union and abroad, was investigated by some, like, not the top-notch experts in the field. So there were some questions as to why would you appoint like a newbie, a professional, but a newbie when you definitely had much more professional people who could have probably done the autopsy better, or who probably could have done a better job, documenting everything they saw on the spot.
Right.
It does seem like there's a lot of stuff that's not fully explored, and I don't know if that's just been withheld, or if it's just like we're not getting full translations basically here, because we can't read the original documents and stuff. So
some parts of the autopsy reports are missing. The histology report, kind of like the one that examines soft tissues, the results of that are missing. From the file, and I think that there are some other things that are like not there. No one knows where they went.
Ooh, that's important info.
There's also some speculation as to the dates, because allegedly the date which is on the actual folder that contains the materials for the case, that date does not match the 26th of February when the bodies were found. So there is speculation that the bodies were found actually earlier, but for some reason it wasn't made known till the 26th of February, which feeds into some conspiracy theories.
It does. Whoa.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are definitely some inconsistencies there, and there's some questions that were raised at the time, but I don't know if we're ever going to know.
No, we'll never totally know. I mean, what it boils down to is, in terrible, terrible weather, these experienced people decided to get out of their tent quickly by cutting a hole in it. Don't know why for sure. Carbon monoxide was the snow sliding down around them. Were there bombs? Don't know.
Yeah, the bomb testing. Now that is interesting, though. I did not realize.
Mai explained why Semyon was out there taking photos.
Right. That it doesn't. I didn't realize that was as plausible as it was.
I didn't either. That's pretty cool. But something made them get out of that tent. before they were completely ready.
Yeah.
And then from there, it sounds like as hypothermia set in, they made a series of terrible decisions because they were poisoned by carbon monoxide or freezing to death or both.
Right.
And then somehow that last surviving group, something physically, whether it was one of those concussive forces from a bomb or a small avalanche, or one of those bombs started a small avalanche, got knocked into that ravine and severely torn up. And then they were all gone. That's pretty much the best summary I can come up with.
Yeah.
Well, and reportedly the last 4 who were found were buried in, what do you call that material that kind of stops radiation?
Lead?
You know what I'm talking about? Lead. Yeah, they were buried in lead coffins.
Oh, they were buried
that
in
also.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I mean, we do understand that they were found some 3 months later, and their bodies were decomposed, but it doesn't explain the lead, though.
No, I mean, they were the ones that were found with a little bit of radiation on them, but it wasn't like crazy levels, like, wow, you're going to contaminate everybody levels. It was only 3 articles of clothing, and they were, if the background is like, say, 5,000, they were like 5,500, 6,000, and 9,000. I mean, it like wasn't insane levels.
But those who side with the theory of radiation are saying that we're looking at official protocols. We do not know what the actual numbers were, and maybe there is a reason why they're buried in lead coffins, because otherwise, why?
They are buried in lead coffins. You're absolutely right.
It's not cheap. That's not cheap. It's not like, oh, that was, there's no way to pass that off as anything but radiation, as far as I'm aware. I can't think of any other reason to bury a body in a lead coffin.
Wow.
Because lead's expensive, lead is soft, lead is heavy.
Yes.
None of
you
that.
Don't make it often.
I did not know that. That of all the things I've heard about this over the years, I have never heard about the lead coffins. That's very interesting.
Wow. I am now, actually, after this conversation, I thought we'd kind of have a little clarity and some ideas. I am actually now more, oh my God, conspiracy theory about
Right,
this.
I know. I need to know even more, because
we might have to revisit this later.
Well, maybe if you get some feedback from your subscribers and you get some questions, we could do a little bit more research. You could look at the English language sources, and I could look at some Russian sources and see what we can dig up on that.
Well, once I post it, if you can post it or share it on your side, so maybe some people who have a little bit more information on the Russian side, maybe you could gather a little more information that way. Yeah, and we can do a follow-up.
Yeah, we'll try that. That sounds like a plan.
Yeah, this sounds so interesting.
Something.
Yeah.
There's something more than I thought there was. Because I've always kind of leaned towards the carbon monoxide theory, that they simply thought for some reason the chimney malfunctioned, and so they panicked and got out in the snow, like, we're just going to go over here to these trees for a wind break, get some fresh air, and then go back.
Right, and then they started to freeze to death, and things went to hell from there. It's kind of where I was.
Well, these people stripping with the hypothermia thing, the more I think about it, doesn't make as much sense, because they were experienced and they were going for their level 3. They would know that if their buddies started, I'm hot, I'm taking my coat off, to be like, hell no, you're not.
Right. And so many of the things were cut and torn. They were obviously removed from them, not the other way around. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But now I did not realize. So how close was that base? Do we know how close the base was, if they were actually doing ground to air?
I never saw anything specifically, and I didn't know it was ground to air. I thought it was planes, so I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think you'll find any conclusive information out there, because it was classified at the time. Yeah. I don't think we'll ever find out, except for the fact that there were some kind of tests. And there were, if there were tests, then clearly there were some military sites around that could have the equipment that was being tested in the area.
Yeah.
True.
Ground air makes way more sense than planes. That weather was some bullshit at that time of year. And nobody's going to risk their multi-million-dollar aircraft.
Right.
Midnight test during a blizzard. with those winds that were hitting straight down like that.
Right. Well, that's why I was like, there's no way this is planes, but I hadn't ever even considered ground to air.
Yeah, because usually that time period you think about planes. That was what everybody was worried about, was planes.
Yeah. So that's super cool. Okay, well, at this point, here we go.
You did have a different perspective for us on it.
Yes, I'm so glad we did this. So
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of Disquiet Time, and we'll see you next time. Everyone say bye!
Bye!
Bye, have a good one.